Good morning, everybody. Good morning, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen of the media. Thank you very much for taking the time out this morning and joining this SAHPRA media briefing this morning. I'd like to begin by introducing myself first. My name is Vincent Makwenya. I'm the CEO of Conversations Media and Communications, and I'll be meetings this morning. Before we kick off, I'd like to just quickly introduce our panel from the SAHPRA leadership. Thereafter, we'll then invite the board chair to kick off the proceedings. So this morning, we are joined by the chairperson of SAHPRA, Professor Helen Rees. We are also joined by the vice chairperson of SAHPRA, Ms. Mandisa Hela. We are also joined by Dr. Boitumelo, Semete-Makokotlela, who is the Chief Executive Officer of SAHPRA. She will also be supported during the course of the proceedings by the Chief Regulatory Officer, Ms. Portia Kambule, as well as by Mr. Andrew Gray, who is the member of 3 SAHPRA advisory committees. Also, finally, Ms. Silverani Padayachi, who is the Senior Manager for Pharmaceutical Evaluations. So that's the panel from SAHPRA. In terms of order of proceedings, we will take you through a very quick, short presentation, just to give a bit of context, as well as some updates on where we are in terms of the vaccine evaluation process. I'll now invite Professor Helen Rees to kick us off. At the end of the presentation, we will then open the floor to questions. Please feel free to raise your hand or post your question on the chat box. Professor Rees.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Vincent. And thank you very much to all the colleagues who've joined us on this. Just to sort of give a sort of couple of sentences of background about why we felt it would be a really good idea to do this is that, you know, over the last few months, in fact, with many conversations with many senior stakeholders, what's become apparent to us is that many people don't really understand the role of a drug regulatory authority. And I guess before COVID, it wasn't really high up on people's mind, you know, to understand it wasn't there. You know, wasn't a priority issue, but it has become a priority issue because of many of the aspects of the work that's been done on COVID. So we felt that it would be really important to explain what SAHPRA does do, how it works, what it doesn't do, and then have a dialogue with yourselves so that we can really, you know, sort of hear the confusions and the questions that might be out there. So in terms of SAHPRA's governing acts, it is a statutory body. We have 2 acts that govern our work. The first is the Medicines and Related Substances Act, and the second one is the Hazardous Substances Act. Now, under the Medicines and Related Substances Act, there are 3 major things that we do. The first is efficient, effective, and ethical assessment and regulation of health products. And that really is what you'll hear us say time and time again: safety, quality, efficacy, and the public interest. The second one is that we have to act in a transparent way, and this is why we appreciate today's discussion. We have to be fair, objective, consistent, and with timeous assessment. And we'll talk, I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about that, because when we started, one of the big problems we had was a backlog. And if you have a backlog, you cannot do timeous assessments. And that delays access of medicines to the public, but it also delays the opportunities for local industry. The third one is that we can enter into agreements to cooperate with other regulatory authorities. This was a very important change in SAHPRA's legislation. Previously, the old Medicines Control Council did everything pretty much itself from A to Z. So anything that was submitted, they would review everything comprehensively themselves. Nowadays, with new technologies, with complex technologies, it really is to the advantage of everyone that we cooperate with other regulatory authorities. There might be really rare expertise that others have that we don't have. But in addition, by doing this, we speed things up. The third thing that allows us to do is also to have regional partnerships. So we're working with many countries who are neighboring countries and in the African region. And that means that we're starting to get sort of consensus thinking. This is important because there's increasing discussion about trying to get more streamlining of regulatory authority thinking across the African region, and to do that formally. Under the Hazardous Substances Act, within the Medicines Act, there's a medical device is defined. And again, this is a different area of expertise that's been required for SAHPRA. This means any instrument, apparatus, implement, machine, appliance, implant, reagent for in vitro use, software, material or other similar or related article contemplated in the Hazardous Substances Act. And again, the Hazardous Substances Act provides again for efficient, effective and ethical evaluation and registration of non-ionizing radiation-emitting devices and radioactive nuclides. So those are the two acts. In terms of the governance framework, it's important to understand how we are positioned. First of all, under the PFMA, we're a Schedule 3A public entity. This means that we're autonomous and we operate independently. And that's incredibly important for a regulatory authority, because that means that we look at the science that is argued within the regulatory authority, and that's what guides decision-making. In terms of the relationship with the National Department of Health, the old Medicines Control Council was within the National Department of Health. Now, that is no longer the case. This is a Schedule 3A public entity, which has allowed SAHPRA to operate outside the National Department of Health. And that is really global best practice now for drug regulatory authorities. The governance structures that we have in place, well, we have a board and obviously the CEO and an executive team, and then the whole team with her. And we report to the Minister of Health and to Parliament through the board. The board is appointed by the minister, and the board has a governance and strategic oversight role. So the board is not the technical decision-making. That strongly rests with the CEO and her team and expert external evaluators. The mandate is to look at safety, quality, efficacy, and performance of products, and we regulate all health products for both human and animal use. Now, we'll unpack this more. Tumi will unpack this more for you about what that actually means. How do we work and how does it operate? But I think one of the important things here, which isn't necessarily understood, is that, as I say, I want to underscore this. The board doesn't take the decisions. In the Act, it's the CEO who takes the technical decisions. And she will explain herself how those decisions are taken. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Helen, for those remarks and articulating our mandate. I just also thought that, as we share with you what we do, we share what our vision is. And it's quite pertinent for the conversation we'll be having, in that our vision is that we are an agile and a responsive African health products regulator. And it says, and that speaks to our ability to be locally relevant. But also in addition, we want to be, and we are globally recognized as a regulator. Some of you may have heard that one of the considerations in South Africa being, provided the opportunity to host the mRNA hub is because of the stringency of the regulator. And it speaks to how we are globally aligned with some of the best practices in regulatory science. Very important to what we do is that we promote access to safe health products, both in the veterinary as well as in the human sector. And quite important to our values is that, yes, we must be responsive, work to the principles of Ubuntu, but also that we're transparent. And hence we're having this engagement with yourself. And we've had many other engagements with the stakeholders and various public sectors. Our mandate as a regulator is that for all the health products, so every health product that you find, either when you purchase or you have a prescription for a medicine, or when you go for an MRI scan have to be monitored by us as a regulator. We would evaluate those products. We regulate those products along their life, their life cycle. But also very important is that we inspect where these products are manufactured, and that those who are selling or distributing these products, they comply with good practices. We register these products, so at a time you can go onto our website and have a look at whether the product that you're consuming has been registered by the authority. And we play a very important role of control. So a number of you may have seen that there were fake vaccines that entered the country sometime last year. We were at the heart of investigating that matter and working together with the police services to deal with those non-compliances and falsified products that may enter the country. But I must say that when we look at just the prevalence of these falsified products in the country, it's nowhere near what you find in other countries. And it really speaks to the strength of our team in ensuring that we have safe products and regulated products in the country. Just to again speak to the process, as Prof. Rees has already alluded to, the regulatory decisions of the authority are decisions that are made by the CEO. The CEO does not work alone in this, works with our internal technical experts, but also members in the academic community who are experts in their own right, that we contract and they work with us on a period of time. So there's extensive consultation that happens with technical experts, even committee members that we work with. Once we've made a decision, if the applicant is not satisfied with the outcome of the decision, our act that was referred to earlier, the Medicines Act, it does provide for an appeal process. And with this appeal process, they can appeal to the CEO, wherein we engage with the applicant on where they're aggrieved, a decision that they're not in alignment with, and then we are able to resolve that. In the event that we're not able to resolve that with the applicant, there's a further step wherein the applicant can then appeal this through the Minister of Health. And in that case, there will be an appeal committee that is constituted with the relevant expertise. And this is a mechanism that we've applied for many years, and it works very well. In terms of our processes and our procedures, I think it's important that we align and we communicate to the stakeholders that we align ourselves with other international regulators. You can imagine a number of the products that we have in South Africa have been authorized elsewhere and are available in other countries. So for us as regulators, it is important that we are consistent, but also that our processes and our regulations are aligned. So we have harmonized our processes and consistent processes that we apply with other regulators. Specifically now around COVID, we are working very closely, and SAHPRA is one of the very few African regulators that are part of this international coalition of medicine regulatory authorities, wherein also WHO is represented. And we're part of this coalition, and this is put in place to support strategic coordination when we're dealing with a specific health matter. It provides for international cooperation among us as regulators. Some of the members that are represented there is ourselves, it is the US FDA, it is the Australian Regulatory Authority,
we seem to be having
Canada.
Problems with your connection, Dr. Semete.
Let me just make sure.
We seem to be having connection problems with you, Doctor. Maybe you can just go back a minute or two of your presentation and resume from there. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to share again. I'm trying a different connection. I apologize for that. I hope.
Our apologies, ladies and gentlemen. Technology does have this tendency from time to time.
I hope this is better, Vincent.
Disappoint.
Can you hear me better, Vincent?
It sounds better. Let's give it a go and see.
Okay. So as I was saying, there's other very stringent regulatory authorities that are part of ICMRA, but also in there we've got...
It's still a bit of a struggle, Doctor. Perhaps you switch off your video, Dr. Semete. Perhaps you can switch off your video and we can leave the slides on the screen, and maybe that will assist in improving your connection. Thank you.
Okay, should we try this, Vincent? Hopefully this helps.
That sounds a lot better. Thank you.
Okay, all right. So thank you for that, and apologies again. You know, I also wanted to highlight here that we also have members, you know, from our BRICS counterparts that are part of IGNA, Brazil. China is also represented here, as well as other members on the African continent like Nigeria. It is important also to indicate that in part of this process, SAHPRA is not mandated to effect procurement of any medicine or any vaccine. So our role focuses largely on the regulatory oversight of these health products. The role of procurement, etc., is that of the public as well as the private healthcare system. In terms of our mandate, and just to reflect on the process that we follow when we authorize COVID vaccines, I thought we'll just indicate this briefly. We look firstly at the applicant, and we look at whether the applicant is licensed according to our processes and that they have the capability to implement their required reporting and what we call vigilance. So can they follow up on the product once we've authorized that? We look at what we call here the place, and I'm going to do a deep dive on this one. And this is where we look at whether the companies comply with good manufacturing practices. We look at production. So how is this product produced? Does it comply with the good practices? And when we study the chemistry of this product, is it of quality? We look at what we call non-clinical data assessment, and that's where we evaluate all the data that the applicant would have around what we call the preclinical studies. And then the fifth step is we look at the safety, the efficacy, and the quality, and I'll do a bit of a deep dive into this one. Once the application addresses all of these elements, we're then able to approve the vaccine in this case. And as I've indicated, wherein we are not approving the vaccine or a health product, there is an appeal process. Very important is that our role does not end there. We also assess the product once it's made available in the market. The applicants, together with other national stakeholders, look at its safety. We look at you know, if it has any adverse side effects. So I just want to do a deep dive on what we look at when we assess what we call here the place, which is where the product is manufactured. We look at compliance to good manufacturing practices. A number of you may have seen the decision that we made based on the advice that we received from the FDA around products that were not manufactured according to good manufacturing practices. And that's the role of the regulator, that where there is non-compliance, we're able to then say, this product is not safe and can therefore not be released. And the public must have confidence in us as a regulator that in the midst of a pandemic, where there is a pressure for us as a country to access vaccines, we're able to make decisions based on the safety of the public. So we look at how this product is manufactured, how is what we call fill and packaged into the final formulation. And we ensure that every facility that manufactured does have a GMP certification. On the assessment of the production, as I've indicated, we look at the chemistry of this product. We focus on how these products are manufactured. Have they been characterized adequately, that what it claims it is indeed what that product is. We look at, are there any impurities? You know, we look at the methods that have been used to validate that when the one batch is made and another batch is made, there will be consistency. So it's a very intricate assessment process that we go into. From a clinical perspective, we look at the safety data, as I've indicated, and also here, very important is that we look at toxicology, and these is typically data that is provided at a preclinical data where we can indicate that the product is indeed safe. We then move to the next step where we look at the efficacy of the product. We look at, is there this robust clinical evidence from phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 clinical studies that shows that this product is effective. When it comes to COVID-19 vaccines, there is a guidance that we all align to as regulator, that these vaccines must have a minimum threshold of 50% efficacy. And all of us as regulators are aligning to that. And so this data, efficacy data, primarily from phase 3 clinical trials, needs to indicate that. And typically the numbers that are required for the study are in the order of thousands. And then very important is that the applicant needs to demonstrate to us that they've got a very clear risk management plan that is contextualized to our local context. In this case, this is where we look at, does their risk management plan speak to how they will be able to assess the efficacy of this vaccine against the variants of concern? At the moment, we're dealing in South Africa with the Beta variant and now the Delta variant. We're also looking at where there are side effects, will they be able to intervene them? And so very, again, intricate process focused on the efficacy and the safety of this product. In the interest of time, I'm going to skip this slide I've already alluded to. My last slide, I want to indicate that, while we've been focused on evaluation of vaccines, and you'll see in the press release we will issue now and what we've communicated, we're evaluating a number of vaccines. There is other work that as a regulator we've been involved in. This work around COVID also refers to authorization of any other new repurposed therapies for the management of COVID-19. You have seen the use of dexamethasone, of tocilizumab, etc. Also, we are responsible for the oversight of medical devices and IVDs. In this case, all the PCRs that are available in the country, SAHPRA had to ensure that those are regulated. And we've authorized close to about 100 or so PCR tests. We also had to authorize antibody as well as antigen tests. And again, we're sitting with about 50 antibody tests that we've evaluated. And that required that we assess the dossier submitted. We do local validation of those. So very involved processes. We also had to authorize and oversee PPE that's used in high-risk settings, such as the N95 masks, as well as ventilators. Very important also is around clinical trials. We have a number of clinical trials that are ongoing in the country. South Africa has participated in a number of these global clinical trials. So for any clinical trial to be implemented in the country, SAHPRA needs to receive the protocol, review that protocol, and make sure that it's satisfied before the study can start. Again, another very important, intricate process. And lastly, as I've indicated, vaccines. And to date, we have vaccines that we've authorized, being the AstraZeneca, the Pfizer vaccine, and the Janssen vaccine. And we've indicated that we are evaluating the Sinovac vaccine, which is at quite an advanced stage, as well as Sinopharm. We received the application last week, and we're also reviewing the Sputnik vaccine. Thank you, Vincent. I'll pause here and we'll take questions.
Thank you very much, Doctor, and thank you to Professor Helen Rees for that brief presentation. We'll now, ladies and gentlemen of the media, open the floor, or the platform rather, to questions. As it's become the norm nowadays, please remember to unmute yourself, raise your question. Before you raise your question, introduce yourself and the media house you're from, and pose the question. I'll also look out for questions on the chat box if there are any. Are there any questions from colleagues in the media? While we are waiting for questions, just to note that following this media briefing, we will be issuing a summary media release with our contact details should any of you wish to engage further or submit any further questions either in writing or talk to any of the leaders from SAHPRA. I see we have Nobuhle Smelane.
Vincent, I can see two hands there.
Okay, we'll first kick off with Tamra Khan. Tamra?
Hi, thanks, Vincent. My question, I think, is to the CEO, Boitumelo. Could you be more specific, please, about where you are in the process of considering the applications for the Sinovac and Sputnik vaccines? Could you just, flesh that out a little, tell us how far you've got, and if possible, when you expect to make a decision? And linked to that, I have a question about transparency. You've said that it's important to the regulator, but from the outside, it seems quite opaque. We don't see how those decisions are made. We're not able to watch the meetings or see any of the documents. To what extent is that precluded by the existing legislation? And is there any leeway to change that, to open it up a little more to public scrutiny? Thanks.
Vincent, do you want me to take one at a time, or we'll take a few?
Let's take one more from Offense, and then you can just take them both, Doctor. Offense?
Thank you very much, and good morning to everyone. AfriForum will be challenging the legality of government being the only one to get access to the vaccines and distribute them. I heard Dr. Tumi actually say that, they are part of a global society of regulators. I'd like to know, what is the standard regulation in other countries? Is it the same as with us, whereas it's only government that procures and distributes vaccines, or is it different in other parts of the world? Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And as I take these questions,
Doctor?
thank you. As I take these questions, as Vincent indicated, we have some of our experts that have joined us who will work with me in addressing these. Let me speak to the one on Sinovac, and I'll make a remark on the transparency, and maybe Andy, you can come and assist us there. In terms of equitable access, I'll ask Prof. Rees to assist me there, particularly in some of, as she wears other hats in the global community. So when it comes to Sinovac and Sputnik, as we've indicated, Sinovac, we're at quite an advanced stage of the evaluation. We've had numerous engagements with the applicant. And as I've indicated, for both applications and for any application, we need to make sure that those elements of data that I said is required is made available, and we are satisfied with what is being provided to us. So at a time, there's a lot of back and forth, with the applicants. So with Sinovac, I must say there should be a decision that is communicated to the applicant in the next coming days.
Sorry, Doctor, your connection is disappointing again.
I'm going to switch off the video. I apologize that the members.
I think let's do that. Thank you.
Okay. So Sinovac, we expect to communicate a decision in the next coming days or so. Sputnik, again, we continue to work with them. They've applied for what we call an emergency use application, as well as a rolling review submission, where they make data available as they receive it. And again, we've had numerous engagements with the applicant, and the expectation is that that will also, start to progress a lot quicker now, because there's a lot of data that they have recently submitted to us. In terms of transparency, and I fully understand, and a number of you may have seen other regulators like the FDA having these public engagement mechanisms, and not every regulator does that. In our case, we've got Section 34 of the Act that speaks to secrecy and confidentiality, not secrecy, let me use the right term, confidentiality in terms of what we're able to share and not. And I'll ask Andy, who sits on our legal committee, to also comment on this. Maybe I'll hand over to Andy, and then I'll ask Prof. Rees to talk about a global mechanism. But what we've said in all our authorization is that the vaccines must be made available as per the national rollout program. Thank you. Over to you, Andy.
Thank you, Tumi. So our legislation is somewhat old-fashioned in that we do have a clause which uses the word secrecy, and it has been interpreted in the past as meaning that everything that happens within the regulator is confidential, including the fact that an application has been submitted for registration of a medicine. So we are shifting to greater transparency, but at the moment, the meetings of advisory committees or the engagements within the units of SAHPRA are not reported transparently. One of the plans for the future is to issue a public assessment report in the same way that other regulators in Europe and Australia, for example, are doing. So we plan over time to develop that SAHPRA or SAHPRA, and it will give a summary of the basis for that decision. And we see similar documents coming out of the WHO emergency use listing process at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just take the questions.
So Andrew, your connection was...
Did you hear that, Vincent? Can you hear me?
Sorry, here? Prof. Andrew.
Yes, Vincent.
I can hear you, Prof. I can hear you. I just wanted to, I was trying to get Andrew to repeat some of the important points he was making with respect to transparency, because we were losing you, Andrew, there. Your connection kept on dipping in and out. If you may just cover that part again and then hand over to Professor Rees, please.
Certainly. Can you hear me now, Vincent? Vincent,
That's
can
better.
you hear me now?
If you can just pick up on...
Certainly.
Yes,
so the key point that I made was that...
Just pick up from there.
Sure. The key point I made was that our legislation is old-fashioned and that it has a secrecy clause in it. That clause has been interpreted as everything that happens within the regulator should be kept confidential. We are re-looking at that interpretation and finding within the current legislation the maximum amount of transparency that we can. However, we do not, as the CEO said, make public access to either committee meetings or to the reports of those committees at the moment. However, the plan in the future is to have a public assessment report which summarizes the grounds for the final regulatory decision and to place that into the public domain, as is done in other regulators such as in Europe and in Australia, and is now being done in WHO in the emergency use listing process. Thanks, Vincent.
Great, thank you, Andrew. Professor Rees?
Thank you. I won't put on my video again because of the problem with the lines, and please tell me if you can't hear me. I just want to support what Andy has said. In fact, one of the discussions between the CEO and the board, and this is the sort of area where the board would be involved, is indeed to say, are there, now that SAHPRA, which started as a board together in 2018, now that we've got a sense of what the legislation does allow us to do, the new legislation, where are we seeing the deficits? And do we think that some of this legislation needs to be revised? And certainly this would be one of the areas. The board and the CEO and the executive have all got a shared vision for much stronger communication and transparency. So I think we would share with you that. And we are somewhat hamstrung, as Andy said, by the legislation. So, but this is something that in the next year to 18 months is very much on the cards, is to say, how can we actually open up so that the kinds of difficulties that we're grappling with now really shouldn't be happening if we could talk more openly. So that's the first thing. The second thing on the question was, can the private sector, is there something about the regulation of SAHPRA that is prohibiting the private sector from getting access to vaccines? So I'm glad you asked that question, because this is the kind of thing is what we do and what we don't do. And in terms of that, what the regulator does is we use the word register. We register the products for use in the country. that's what we do. Who after that, and I think it was on one of the slides, probably went too quickly, but both the public and the private sector can use the product. The issue of, for the vaccines, about the government procurement, private sector procurement, that is a policy issue that rests with the Department of Health and with the private sector. So when SAHPRA registers something, it is registered for use in the country, and it's not prohibited to the public or the private sector. That is not the role of the regulator. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to take a few questions from the chat box. Dr. Semete, let's try and have your video on. Seems as if your connection has improved. So Megan Lawrence from Network 24, she's asking, how far are we with the approval of the Sinovac and Sputnik vaccine? I'll take another one from Mdaga, who asks, after approval, how long does it take to receive vaccines? And just one last more, Anton Meyer from Pretoria FM is asking, does SAHPRA have a mandate to set the conditions on who may and may not purchase vaccines? So maybe let's just take those three for now, and then I'll take the rest. Doctor?
Thank you. Just to indicate again that with the Sinovac vaccine, quite advanced, we hope to have a decision out in the next coming days or so. I also want to just indicate that we have received an application for Sinopharm. And also just to educate the public that while we make reference to these vaccines in the names of the manufacturer, from an application perspective in the country, we could have more than one applicant for each one of these vaccines. And every application we receive, we have to review it for that applicant because they could be manufacturing in a different site to another applicant. What I also want to highlight is that typically a process for authorizing vaccines takes about 20 months or so. And in this case, because we are aware that we are operating under a pandemic and that we have to expedite our processes, we've significantly reduced this time to about 90 working days, which means that we're working tirelessly over weekends, over public holidays. We've gotten all our expert committees, all hands on deck to ensure that we don't have any delays. And it also then speaks to the quality of the submission we require. So if we get a good quality submission, we're able to stick to this 90-day timeframe. But if it's not a good quality submission, it requires a bit of back and forth with the applicant, which could then extend the time. Because while we are expediting the timeframes, we remain to be stringent on the requirements. In terms of how long after approval the vaccine becomes available, as a health product regulator, we don't get involved in terms of matters of logistics and distribution of the vaccine. But what we do is to ensure that all the entities that are responsible along that value chain are compliant with good distribution practices, good wholesaling practices, particularly because these biological products, vaccines are biological products, they need to be stored in proper conditions so that they do not lose their integrity. So we monitor that, but we're not involved in the actual procurement, etc. And in terms of who may purchase or not, again, as we've made reference to, in our case, we've said, the vaccines must be available as per the national rollout strategy. So whatever strategy that the Department of Health and the government indicates that they will apply, as long as there is compliance with that. And so we need to just ensure that there is compliance to that and no deviation from that. But we cannot preclude anyone from procuring. What we say is there's a national strategy and let's all applicants comply with that.
Vincent, can I quickly add something? There is one step between approval and market access, which is important with vaccines. These products each batch has to be approved at our National Control Laboratory in Bloemfontein. It's different from other small molecule medicines, but all vaccines, and it's not particular to COVID-19, all vaccines have batch release. So every batch has to be checked against the standards in Bloemfontein before it can be released into the distribution chain. And then just on the issue of who can purchase, there's obviously the scheduling. So we schedule medicines into different categories, and that sets rules as to how they can be moved through the distribution chain. In the case of COVID-19 vaccines, they are Schedule 4 products, so they are prescription-only products. So they're not something that you can go and buy for yourself over the counter. In addition, internationally, the manufacturers of vaccines have indicated that they are only willing to sell to national governments. And the reason for that is that they do not want to see arbitrage. They do not want to see people buying and then selling vaccines at a profit in order to control the market and shift the way in which people are able to access vaccines in different countries. We could see, for example, vaccines in lower income countries being bought up by the rich and exported again out of those countries if we had an unregulated market with everyone being able to buy them. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Andrew. Your connection seems also to have improved. So for the next round, maybe you can keep your video on. We now have a question from Alex, and after Alex, I'll take more questions from the chat box. Alex?
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Alex.
Great, thank you very much. This is Alex Winning from Reuters news agency. I have two questions. The first one about the Sputnik vaccine. I just did a quick search on the internet, and it looks like you received the documentation for Sputnik in February. Now, your CEO just said that, you know, normally if you receive a good application, it might take 3 months. It's now longer than that. So I'd like to ask, the first part of it is, what was missing in the original application? Why couldn't you process it in 3 months? Specifically, what data in that application wasn't contained there that meant that you couldn't make a decision on the vaccine? And now, what is still outstanding? Do you have doubts about how rigorous the trials were conducted in Russia? Do you want them to provide more data on the efficacy against either, the Beta or the Delta variant? Is it this issue about people living with HIV, which is very important in South Africa? What more do you want from them before you make your decision? And then the second question is, just for my understanding, is the order in which this is all happening. So far you've approved Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson and AstraZeneca, and that's understandable because there are bilateral deals with Pfizer and Johnson & Johnson, and with AstraZeneca, there was that deal with Serum Institute. But should we understand the fact that you're reviewing applications from Sinovac, Sinopharm and Sputnik, does that mean that the government is either seriously considering, or the government has told you that these vaccines will form a part of the vaccination program? I appreciate that, a local supplier could approach you and say, we want you to review those vaccines, but does SAHPRA only get involved if there's a real chance that South Africa is going to use these vaccines in its vaccination rollout? Thank you.
Great, thank you, Alex. The first question that Alex posed covers Isaac Mhlangu's question from the Sowetan. So, Doctor, if you may please take those questions. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll ask, I'll make some comments and I'll ask my colleague Silverani to comment. So in terms of Sputnik, as I've indicated, the other application that they made is what we call a rolling review. So that means as data becomes available, they make that available to us. So for example, if we consider the Janssen vaccine, they submitted to us, I think, early December, and we made a decision at the end of March because they were making data as it became available. There is also for Sinovac a request for what we call a Section 21, which is a mechanism that we've utilized to provide emergency use, authorization. In the Act, you won't see such a mechanism. And so what you will see is what we call Section 21. And Section 21 enables for access to unregistered, health products. And so we've had to work around our guidelines to ensure that, again, we are relevant to the context, that wherein there isn't a very clearly articulated mechanism of an emergency use authorization, we've at least created that room to be able to work with speed. And so, and as I've indicated, it is about the quality of the submission, and the timeframes we provide are guidance. And we will ensure that the data that is received, is adequate. And that's important. And I'll ask Silverani to comment. You make a very important point around the At5. We have to ensure that when or if we authorize this vaccine, we are comfortable that the clinical data pertaining to the Ad5 is adequate. And a number of you are aware of the enhanced disease that it presented when it was trialed in the Pambili trial for HIV. But Silverani will speak to what was missing. But again, we are bound to confidentiality, so we're not going to go into this in a lot of detail. I think the applicants will also not be happy if we divulge their detail. Regarding what we look at, for us, whether it will be procured or not is a matter that we don't really consider in whether we assess or not. We assess every application that is made to us. So if the government decides not to procure Sinopharm, for us, it is immaterial. If Sinopharm meets the regulatory requirements, we will authorize it. So, we don't consider that. So we evaluate everything that comes through to us. Silverani, do you want to briefly comment? And again, remember, we're bound by confidentiality.
Thank you for that. And I think you have already, to me, indicated that we do look at various aspects. And in this case, with the Sputnik, we had what was called a rolling review. So bits of information was available initially. We had sent out a recommendation to the applicant of elements that were deficient in the submission. So we did receive some feedback from them. We also got a breakdown of the information that they will be able to avail to us, and in which review or in which sequence of the submission. And in such instances, we did not receive all of the information that was expected in the recommendations, as we wait to receive them in the rolling portions. In the last week, we had received 3 packs from the Sputnik applicant, and the latest one being on the 28th, which we do believe has a significant amount of information that we were awaiting to get ahead with the evaluation. So I think there will be progress on that as we review the information that has been shared. I'm not at liberty to specify which information has been submitted, but we do believe a significant amount of information has been shared, which we would be able to make progress on. Thank you.
Thank you, Silverani. I'm noting on the chat box that some media colleagues are struggling to hear, which means we may be experiencing the connection in different ways. In some areas, it's coming across well. In some areas, it dips in and out. I will say to colleagues that have missed some of the bits that were shared by Silverani, please reach out to us. Our contact details will be at the end of the media release that you will receive shortly. And we will endeavor to facilitate responses to any questions that may have not been sufficiently heard or answers. One of my colleagues has posted email addresses that you can just reach out to should you require further engagements and more information. Thank you. Are there any more questions? at this stage.
Vincent, could I just make a comment as well, because it relates.
Absolutely.
I'm going to try and put on my video, but if I disappear, I'm going to turn it off again. I think it's important, just in terms of the whole spectrum, to point out that there are probably now over 200 vaccines in the pipeline globally. I just think that we should realize that this, we all hoped we would get rid of this virus quickly, and it's quite apparent we're not going to, that we're going to have it not even for 1 year, but and indeed it might start to become an annual circulating virus. So we are going to need a lot of vaccines, and there are, as I say, 200 in the pipeline. And just to underscore that, you know, the ones that we're seeing now are the ones that were furthest ahead in development, but there will be many more that will come through over time. And the important thing here is to have consistency in the standards of review. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. I see there's a hand from Temra Khan. Temra?
Hi there. I have a question about the process SAHPRA would use if it turns out that a vaccine that has been approved is no longer effective or efficacious. I know this is hypothetical, but what would the regulator do, or what processes would it follow if you get, I don't know, an Omega variant, which renders one of the vaccines that you have already approved completely ineffective? Would you, as the regulator, take steps to effectively pull it from the market? How would that work?
Dr. Semete?
No, thanks for that question, Tamar. A very good question. And I'll also ask maybe my colleagues to come in and assist here. So, I mean, what we would typically do is when there is data that the vaccine is not effective, what we would do is look at that data and engage with the applicant. And through that engagement, we then make a decision on availability of this. This is something that, again, is built in the Act, in that we do have a mechanism to withdraw a registration. If it's a Section 21, so this emergency type use mechanism, we're able to withdraw it immediately. If it's a market authorization, what is required, and we would do anyway, is that we write to the applicant and indicate that they must then highlight to us why we should not withdraw that authorization. So it really involves a lot of engagement and looking at the data. And in this case, with these vaccines, I mean, you may have seen some of the recent data around AstraZeneca, for example, where we knew that its efficacy against the beta variant was significantly low. It was about 20%, right? So we looked at that data. And now this emerging data that indicates that it may have a better efficacy against the Delta variant. So because, again, this is a new disease, there's a lot of information that's emerging. This constant engagement with the applicants, constant review of the data is important. So we can withdraw an application or you know, recommend you know, to the National Department of Health that based on this is what we would recommend. But again, as data is available, we are able to review that decision. I don't know if Andy wants to come in here from an ACT perspective, and anyone else really from the team.
Thanks, Tumi. So, Tamar, there is also a provision in the Act to declare a medicine undesirable, and that enables us to remove something from the market. However, where there is a national rollout program, a national vaccination program, it's a lot easier for those decisions to be made in a central way by the National Department of Health and its advisory bodies in order to ensure that there is safe procurement and safe utilization of an effective vaccine. However, we can also think about the fact that this is not a novel problem. So we register antimicrobials, antibiotics, and resistance develops against them. We don't remove those products from the market, but we would communicate as the data changes about where they could or could not be used. So it's not a novel problem that we've never encountered before. Thank you.
Vincent, could I add to that?
Sure.
Thank you. So Tamara, just for everyone's interest, there was a discussion this week, in fact, between a whole range of stakeholders, including the MRC, the NICD, different provincial health departments, NHLS, people who are looking independently through different lenses at vaccine effectiveness. And what is being discussed is to have a national effectiveness protocol. The World Health Organization has developed some templates for this. And now with all the stakeholders who have an interest in looking at this, there is a proposal that we should have a national effectiveness protocol. And what that would allow is to put new vaccines in and measure effectiveness along with the old vaccines. As Tumi said, things change. And if the variant changes, you might find a vaccine that was previously working well isn't working as well. And in this case, AstraZeneca might potentially work better with the Delta variant. So that's the one thing, that to have an effectiveness protocol that will allow us to measure effectiveness over time. And that will also allow us to see what happens as the variants change, which I think at this time we would anticipate would happen. The second thing that is relevant here in terms of vaccine science is that there's a huge amount of work going on globally, taking what were previously sort of standalone vaccines, even if there were 2 doses, and then boosting them with a different vaccine. So even if we saw something that didn't work, that there is now a lot of interest to say, if you mix the vaccine platforms, do you actually sort of boost and kickstart the immune system with 2 different stimuluses, even if the primary one wasn't that good? If you give a different vaccine, can you stimulate it? So the point I'm trying to make is that the science is changing. We can have this discussion, I promise you, in a month's time, and we'll be saying somewhat different things on some areas because the science is changing so rapidly. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Prof. I see the summary that was not properly heard from Silverani has been posted on the chat box for Tamra's benefit and other colleagues who may have missed what Silverani said. So I take that part as having been addressed, unless there is a desire for us to try Silverani again and just ask her to summarize those last points and see how the connection comes across. Okay, I see colleagues are covered. Silverani, you don't have to speak again. Looks like everybody's covered. Okay, just looking if there are any hands that I may have missed. There are no hands. I think we have reached the end of this briefing in the absence of any further questions. I don't know, Dr. Semete, are there any closing remarks that you'd like to share before we close the session?
Yes, I would like to do so, and I'm sure Prof. Rees also, as the board chair, would like to do so. I think for us, the key message really that we want to communicate is that we're an independent regulator. All the decisions that we make are based on science. And this becomes particularly important now as we deal with this new disease, where there is constantly new scientific data that is emerging, that we need to keep abreast on that. And that even when we do change our decision, whatever we change it to, it's based on science. And it's important also that we continue to be stringent, because our mandate requires that we keep the safety of the public really as what is paramount for us. So we have heard the public, we've heard about the urgency, the need for the country to have vaccines as soon as possible. We're equally affected by COVID-19. And while we appreciate and acknowledge that pressure and that urgency, it is important that as a regulator, we make science-based decisions and we're not influenced by any type of pressure. Because as the public, you need to have confidence in us. I always make this example that when you take medication, if you procure or if you purchase paracetamol off the counter or whatever medication you took this morning, At no point did you wonder whether it will do what it claims to do, because you've got a stringent regulator. And I'd like for that to be really what we take away from this, that when we take, whether it's the chronic medication we take, or whether we go for chemotherapy, whether we go for MRI scans, at no point do you wonder, is this product going to do what it claims to do? Because that's our job. And we need to ensure that whatever that's contained in that leaflet, that's in this product, that's in that medicine, it is what is correct, and that you know what the side effects are, you know what the contraindications. And so the integrity of the regulator, it has to be protected, because yes, we're responding to COVID now, but our work is quite broad, and we cannot compromise on how we operate. Thank you, Vincent. I'll give over to the board chair.
Thank you. So I just have a slightly different take from what Tumi said, because I think this is very important. It is science, but there has been there's a huge sensitivity to the public health need. So it was not, and it has not been business as usual, as you've just seen, because of the COVID pandemic. And as Tumi has outlined, everything, all of those slides on the infographic that showed the areas of focus that SAHPRA has had, everything has been fast-tracked with special committees, more experts, external experts brought in, and people reviewing as night and day, and the board asking the questions all the time, where are we, where are we? The sort of questions you're asking are the questions that the board also asks, because as I say, the board's role is different. That's the first comment I wanted to make. The second one, just building on what Tumi said, I think everyone is aware that in one recent survey, only about 70% of South Africans said they would want to take a vaccine. And so what we have to ask ourselves is what will increase vaccine demand and what will decrease vaccine demand? Now, one thing that I think will increase vaccine demand is once we really get the numbers up, because people will know people who've had vaccines, they'll see that nothing bad happened, and see the sort of confidence that slowly we hope to build up in communities. So certainly increasing access, numbers, coverage, I think will change some of that 30% view that's uncertain. What will really damage it is if the regulator is seen to allow into the system vaccines that do not fulfill that safety, quality, efficacy criteria. So you can see already worldwide that where things have happened with a vaccine, you can see that the population moves away very quickly and gets uncertain. So the certainty of having a rigorous regulator that's doing its job and is fast-tracking things is, I think, incredibly important for public confidence. And my third thing is it would be very helpful. As I said, we recognize the communication isn't good, and Andy outlined some of the reasons for that, which are in the legislation, but we can do better. And this is a sort of the beginning of us to say, how do we do better? And because all of you are in the media space, I think if you have suggestions to us about how we can open up the transparency, even with the framework that you've just had described, it will be tremendously helpful, because you are the voice for us to the public. And we're not only talking about vaccines, we're really talking about the whole mandate of the regulator. But thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Prof. This brings us to the end of this media briefing. I'd like to express a lot of gratitude to...
Vincent, there's a question on the chat box.
Is there another question?
Yes.
Oh, sorry, I missed that question. Okay, there is a question, but this question really...
okay. Vincent, do you want me to briefly just respond to that?
Yes, please, thank you.
Certainly. So the Janssen vaccine, like all vaccines, might cause some reactogenicity, some mild symptoms, injection site pain, for example, after vaccination. However, there is no official stance that says that anyone who has been vaccinated should stay at home for any period of time after vaccination. It's up to each individual patient as to how they respond to that vaccine. And if their side effects do mean that they do not feel well for a couple of days, that has to be dealt with their employer. But there's nothing in the labeling of the vaccine that makes this obligatory. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Andy. I'm going to double check one last time. Okay, there's no question now on the chat box. Okay, so that brings us to the end of this session. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen of the media, and many thanks to colleagues from SAHPRA who've made themselves available for this session. We've posted our contact details for any more information that may be required. And as I promised, we will endeavor to facilitate the availability of that information as soon as possible. Thank you very much. Have a good day all.